The VR Report podcast with David Jean O.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is David O from the VR Report, and I have a very special guest, Terry Schussler. Hey, Terry, what's going on, man?
Hey, it's hot.
It's
always
hot.
hot.
That's right. That's right. It's the summer. You know, I'm trying
Yeah.
to represent with my Aloha shirt because, boy, it's now in the 90s and hundreds pretty much every day here in the summertime.
Yeah, I was telling my family I'm going to come down to Austin so I can cool off for a little bit.
That's right. Fantastic. For the audience, you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. So Terry Schussler, and my job, Deutsche Telekom, is Senior Director of XR and Spatial Computing. We flip-flopped the word metaverse in and out of that over the last couple of years. Today, I'm actually not speaking on behalf of Deutsche Telekom. I'm speaking on my own behalf, just for clarity's sake.
Fantastic. And in terms of recent news, you're representing with your AWE shirt. We just concluded with AWE.
That's right.
Was there anything else from AWE you thought was very interesting?
Yeah, there was quite a lot of software and hardware stuff. I personally focused a little bit more this time on the hardware side than I usually do. So I was really interested in also AI enablement on hardware devices. I looked at different input modalities supporting sort of AI technologies like eye tracking and BCI and things like that. So you're starting to see a lot more overt merger of AI technologies as functional enablement for XR use cases. And I think, this year it's new and improved with AI. Next year you'll have to have AI. And so that the cachet of having AI will be less. But clearly that integration, as I've been saying for years at AWE and my presentations there, AI is sort of like the enabling oil for the XR machinery. And now we're really going to start to spin the wheels when we start layering in all of the power of AI with multimodal user experiences in particular.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, AI is the brain for all of this technology that we're calling XR, from headsets to inputs of hand tracking to even foot tracking. I saw a demo that escapes me. I'm so sorry. I'll have to probably edit something in there. But there was an inexpensive foot tracking device. It was kind of a boot. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, the VR shoes.
The VR shoes.
Yeah. So it's sort of like the Disney Holotile, but as a foot wearable, so you can move around in a sort of 360 manner. I didn't get a chance to try them out, but I did see the demo of them, and they look pretty fascinating. I highlighted them as one of the more interesting devices at the show. I still think that it's, sort of focusing on the sort of Ready Player Me experience, but being able to allow people to locomote using their physical muscle memory is really important for enterprise use cases where you're trying to teach people how to operate machinery in a digital twin sort of manner, and being able to physically move your body in all manners, locomote physically is more comfortable than teleporting for a lot of people that get nauseous in VR when you jump them around. And so I think that's got a lot of use cases for enterprise, actually. Surprise, even though a lot of people think it's a great gaming product, to me, it's an enterprise product.
Yeah, 100%, because the cost factor, the form factor, and I think there's other use cases besides training, like just understanding behavior. For example, walking down an aisle and figure out what excites people if they're shopping, etc. But before jumping into all of that, I wanted to talk more about your origin story, Terry. We've known each other for a long time. You have such a rich history. Also, not only someone representing the XR community and also being a very powerful speaker and someone who has been in the space for a long time, but kind of give the audience a rundown of who you are.
Sure. Are you trying to say I'm old? No, I'm just kidding. So I've been a self-taught software developer since the age of 11, 12. And I came at becoming a programmer through my interest in comic books. So when I was a kid, I collected comic books, and actually with some creative friends, started doing stop motion photography, and then went on to working on a light box to do animated films. And this is all doing it, just with physical models of tanks, and doing photography from a roof of cars moving down the street and stopping and switching cars out, and just doing the early kind of learning work about that. But I got really interested in computers when I watched a documentary on PBS in the United States where a lady was drawing on a computer screen. This was super early, in the 70s, and I didn't know what I was really looking at. I thought, wow, you can get computers like that, and didn't realize that there's two machines in the world that actually had the technical capability that they were demonstrating. And so, this started me on a journey to go, where can I get access to computers And I want to draw on the computers. I want to do art on there instead of doing it on a light box. And at the same time, as a comic book collector, I went to a comic book show and I met one of the, unfortunately he's passed recently, but one of the most famous comic book artists, George Perez, and a couple others. And I showed my early portfolio of work to them. And they said, well, son, keep working on your anatomy. And, if you have a passion for something, you keep at it, you're bound to be successful. And that became a motivator for me to learn how to program computers so that I could create drawings on a computer. So I couldn't get to this, $10 million machine, but I could get access to a TRS-80 Model 1. I could get access to an Apple One. By fortune, the first Apple dealer in the East Coast of the United States was near my home. And so I was able to go in and actually hang out with them and clean their store and do other errands so that they let me use the computer for a little while. And I wrote some of the earliest paint software for microcomputers so that I could draw and then erase my errors until I got it right iteratively on the computer. And so this was, for me, it was, of course, I wasn't using a stylus or a touchscreen. It was using, arrows and space bar and, control was on the keyboard.
That sounds horrible.
It was really hard to do. Pen down, draw, move here,
right.
Pen up, change color. It was like the early days of like plotters,
right.
but being done digitally on a screen way before there was a PostScript or anything. And so, but it taught me how to program. And and then I learned how to write animation software. So I got really interested in moving things around the screen and building games. And that started my journey. And so I've been a comic book collector my whole life, still very avid. And there's been an intertwining between my interest in comics and my interest in technology. And a lot of the work that I've done, not all of it, but a decent chunk of the work I've done with computers, software development, has been developing tools to enable people to communicate using multimedia or media, painting programs, illustration tools, a product called Macromedia Director, which was a very popular multimedia authoring tool before Flash. I worked on many products like that. And that kind of led me to this convergence of using my interest in comic books and using my capabilities with technology to do things that mattered for me. And as a collector, one of the more interesting things I did related to that intersection is in 2013, I helped create a platform where we took the Classics Illustrated comic book series from the 1940s to the 60s, which was really the precursor to graphic novels. These were comic books that were based on famous literature. And we digitized them for the first time and brought them up on Apple iOS iBooks and App Store platform. And so that, I've done a lot of other work with animated characters, SpongeBob SquarePants, which is like the typeface that you see here, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and a whole bunch of other things, Felix the Cat. I've had a lot of fun doing that. So I like to always have fun with what I'm doing. And so comic books allows me to sort of still be a 12-year-old and think and act like a 12-year-old, even though I'm older than
that. Well, you have an awesome comic book collection. I got to see on screen, your Secret Wars collection. That was my foray into comics. And
I brought one for you. Here you go. So you got
Doctor Strange. Fantastic.
Yeah, actually, here we go.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
There we go.
That is so cool.
There you
go. I don't know if you checked out the What If series with Apple Vision Pro, but his characters from that universe actually make a cameo, which I thought was really awesome.
Yes.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So some of the things that we discussed, AWE just wrapped up, some recent news. I got confirmation from multiple sources from people who are at Ultraleap. They're kind of closing the doors, and someone who's very close to hand tracking. And I also worked at the early days of Leap Motion. It was very sad, but it's kind of surprising and not that we're starting to see a lot of these layoffs and closing of doors. Do you think that this is going to be a trend going forward?
So specifically to Ultraleap, and I also have been involved since the first days of Ultra Haptics as well as Leap Motion before their merger, is I think what you see was the logical result of commoditization of the value of the technology that they built, at least in terms of the hand tracking technology. But I think, you're going to see more of that. So anybody who's building, if I back up a little bit, being older, I've had a chance to sort of see how software has evolved over decades. And I always think of software like sediment. So we start with the sort of high level application implementations, and eventually it becomes a framework, and then it's a function within a framework, and then it goes into the operating system, and eventually it's in the microcode, right? And we can see this happening with lots of things on the chipset side. For example, Qualcomm's chipsets, you see a lot of stuff now dropping, directly into the microcode because you need to have reduced compute costs per watt, right? So you need to be able to address this sort of 1 watt goal state, 50 gram target state that they want to have with these devices. And in order to do the enablement, you've got to move the functionality of that onto the chipset. So then you impact the people who made their bones and made their living selling it as a middleware layer or application plugin or framework plugin or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think the haptic side of it is super interesting, but it was, I think, really difficult for them to figure out the right ways to monetize it at scale. So there was tons of really great use cases. I built stuff, interactive 3D ticket purchasing experiences where you could feel the ticket, and spatially reach your hands out and grab it and all this really cool stuff. But it's not tangible enough for a lot of people. It's really useful for entertainment use cases and very specific sort of kiosk-y kind of use cases, but it doesn't scale right to the consumer, and that's where it gets to be problematic. So I think, yeah, that's probably the main issues with Ultraleap. The value of their IP is high, and so it's going to be IP portfolio licensing play for sure. Be curious to see if Apple comes back as a third stab to acquire the IP of the Leap Motion, because we know they tried twice before to buy the company.
That's public, yeah. And,
Yep.
David Holst and Michael Buchwald, I know them very well. That was a very surprising turn of events internally, if you could imagine, when that was all going down.
Yeah, I remember. So
right.
I think there are other companies that are doing, I think there's roll up that you're going to see, especially like with Gen AI technology, where people are doing very specific sort of media generation types, generating music. I'm generating 360 environments. I'm doing this, that, next thing. There's going to be roll up there. At some point, that will also get commoditized. Now, does that go into Unity, and does Unity integrate that? Or does Apple put it into, the Swift frameworks? Does it get rolled into Snapdragon Spaces in some form? I don't know yet. Or Niantic's Lightship ARDK, could start tackling some of these things and integrating them. And then there's competition in that space. So right now, these guys have to start thinking ahead about what's my game plan when I start having more competition from the bigger players.
That's right.
Unfortunately, there's a weird dichotomy I've seen where startup companies, CEOs think that they're going to, like 20% of the startup company CEOs in Germany think they're going to be unicorns, which is up from like 3% a year ago. So their expectations are like, the hockey stick expectations are like off the chart. But then there's also a lot of people, startup tech companies, thinking I'm going to exit through acquisition. Like that is the only reason they're building the company. It's never to make money or scale. It's to be acquired. And so those are really interesting sort of different points of view with a lot of companies coming to the table in the startup space. And I think that's a very dangerous game to play.
I agree. And I think the idea of grading a business on acquisition, where's the there? And, building these companies, which is great for investors with small teams trying to get that unicorn status. But in terms of the product and innovation, yeah, it does give pause. Apple announced that they are going to other parts of Europe. What do you think about this latest launch of being able to expand their audience?
Well, I think there'll be a lot less people smuggling Apple Vision Pros on airplane flights. I remember reading about 200 people smuggling Apple Vision Pros into Saudi Arabia, and there's all kinds of stories on that. Yeah, the demand is there. I mean, the question is it the same demand that was, relatively speaking, in the US at launch, or is it just a small incremental demand? My gut tells me that in certain countries, clearly Japan and Germany, France, where there's a history of buy-in on higher end devices, I think, Quest, Pro and so forth, I think they'll be successful and deliver quite a decent little developer / enterprise market penetration in that space. I mean, we already know that if you just look at what Apple's been doing with the Vision OS, they clearly hearing that the customers that are buying this device are doing enterprise use cases, and they're opening up APIs and adding functionality that is exclusive to enterprise use cases, even contractually so. And so I think that is a pretty clear storyline that that's where the bulk of the buy-in is going to be initially with the device. And then there'll be the developers who want to make their bones being Apple Vision Pro developers. But it is an interesting thing that I was helping somebody look for work about a month ago, and I went searching online for positions for people who are Apple Vision Pro developers, and I couldn't find any. So it's still kind of early days where companies are saying, hey, we need to go get an expert to come in who already has the ability to deliver Swift-based projects on Apple Vision Pro, or take a Unity project and port it over or whatever. And so I think that is surprising to me a little bit, actually. I was like really surprised I could not find very many listings of jobs. And I went across a few different job sites just trying to see for my friend if there was anything available, and not much. So still early days.
Still very early days. I think from an enterprise perspective, Apple positioning the Apple Vision Pro as a consumer headset, I think hurt a little bit, because most enterprise companies are in a wait to see mode. And when they see headlines saying, wow, this isn't the big consumer unveil that we were expecting, that hurt a little bit, because now they're maybe a little cold to jump into the water and say, yeah, let's go ahead and start building some of those use cases out when the numbers didn't seem as exciting as they were. But I think if they positioned it, which is unlike Apple in their culture, to say that it's a developer kit and it's for developers to spark interest and for enterprise to start developing these use cases to complement their current enterprise solutions, I think that would have probably been a better way to position it, where people would say, yeah, I believe that and I'm ready to invest.
Yeah.
And people don't understand with new technology, first models are always expensive. But at the same time, too, that strategy has always worked for Apple. Release a product that becomes maybe inaccessible for the masses. So by the time they have something ready for the consumer, people go, wow, now it's like half the price or a third of the price, and I'm ready to jump in.
That's completely right. I mean, interestingly, Magic Leap 1 was marketed in a similar manner when it first came
100%.
out, and they learned very quickly that, I mean, if you go to the team now and you talk to them about Magic Leap 2, all they're talking about is enterprise use cases. That's it,
That's
and
right.
so they realize that's where they're going to make their living and their business. Vario doesn't try to pitch their product as the ultimate consumer VR headset, So absolutely, I think that's spot on. But Apple's playing a long-term game. A lot of these companies are in it for like a 3-year window. Apple's in it for a 20-year window. And there's a big difference in the way you play the game when you're doing that. And so, like on the software side, particularly, the strategy is clear that they're very, very long-term thinking about where they're going with this and how it transitions the Mac platform into a spatial platform.
100%. And now that Apple has announced their headset and it's been released, we can't avoid the other, tech giant, Samsung.
So interestingly, Samsung could, depending on the device and price point, could have an opportunity to compete with Apple Vision Pro here if they can bring their product down into the $1,000 to $1,500 price point, similar to the Quest Pro. That creates a very interesting opportunity for them. Can they sell a high-end prosumer XR device? The advantage that they have is over all of the other non-Apple products is that they're going to be bringing Google App Store to the table out the gate. The only other player that I'm aware of right now that can kind of do that is Xreal with the Beam Pro, which is basically an Android-based device, which then projects, Android apps in Nebula or something equivalent, in a spatial manner. So it's important that I can lean into the history of existing applications and pick and choose the things that I might want to have in a spatial context. But these are not fully spatial apps. These are 2D apps projected in a 3D environment. We haven't fully made the leap yet to, have and consume spatial apps like we have mobile apps. And so I think that journey is going to take a while. So the story that they tell at launch is going to be very, very important. Because if they tell a consumer story, they have to bring consumer experiences to the table in parallel. It can't just be, we're just pumping through what's already been there and projecting that in a 3D space. That doesn't matter enough because we already have had that for many years on many devices and it hasn't been enough. You need to have both that and the ability to bring completely new immersive experiences to the table on the device to make it make sense. So I think price
100%.
point and storyline matter both here a lot for Samsung.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very strategic for them to really embrace what the XR community already had laid out as in terms of a roadmap of what worked and what didn't. You brought up a great scenario where being able to view your 2D apps in your real world environment just isn't exciting because you have to compensate for wearing something on your head. So there's friction there. The portability of just having, a tablet or a mobile phone is so much more easier. There's no friction there. And you already have the apps. You've already experienced it and you're not bringing anything new to the XR experience or through a headset in 3D or spatial, however you want to call it, to actually have a differentiation, especially around the content. And I think that's something that I hope Samsung will learn and kind of take as in stride to say, hey, we really need to learn and be close with all this innovation that's been involved with the XR community, which I think Apple didn't do as much.
A lot of people went at it with, I want to port my Unity project that's a VR project or an AR project and have it run in the Apple Vision Pro, and I want to leverage the code work that I've already done, the design work, and the thinking of affordance and all of that, and then tap the unique functional value of automatic eye tracking and micro gestures and other functional capabilities that are available through Vision OS. And Apple obviously enabled that because they had no choice really. Otherwise they were going to have a very small developer ecosystem. But as they move forward, they're going to continue to invest in what makes Apple unique, and they've always preferred that you lean into and build using Apple tools and technologies from the ground up, because that's a competitive value for them. So it makes they're going to be in that struggle. I think as Swift gets more powerful and the frameworks around Swift, Reality Kit, and everything else get more capable, it puts pressure on Unity. Unity has tried to do this sort of abstraction approach. Hey, build with us and we can target the Quest and we can target the Apple Vision Pro and we can target this, that, and the next thing. And they do that very well. And it's hard work. And I give them a lot of credit for that hard work. But that's a very challenging game to play. And it's had, I think, some impact on their business as we've seen.
100%.
I would just say, I think that there is a middle ground. And look, I've been a multi-platform software developer my entire life. Almost every mobile app that I've ever built was cross-platform, sometimes 7 different app store platforms concurrently. So I've always targeted, doing that. And there's ways to do it and still tap the unique value proposition of a device or operating system ecosystem functionality. With Macromedia Director, if I go back, I pushed Apple QuickTime and Balloon Help, which was part of System 7. That's how long ago I worked on Mac. And made the unique functional implementations of those happen. And so if you're on a Mac and you're deploying, through that product, you got a better experience. But it wasn't like it precluded you from also delivering a comprehensive multimedia experience to a Windows user or an FM Towns user or an SGI box user. So we ended up having players that ran on like 8 or 9 different platforms for that reason. And ultimately that enabled us to build Shockwave, which was the first real multimedia plugin for the browser before Flash. And so then you could take these projects and implement them as interactive website elements.
Do you think in terms of those interactive website elements, the future is WebGL and being able to have XR experiences on the web?
I think, I've been a big proponent of open standards and standards which provide preservation of data legacy. I was a big Flash user and I was very involved with Flash, but I did see the downside of it. And, unfortunately, when now we go to archive.org and then we have dead websites, right? So I felt that pain on a personal level. I have websites that no longer run because I did work in Flash at the time. But I've been a big proponent of WebXR and WebGL and other initiatives, OpenXR, to build a sort of cohesive open standards approach. In my and this is somewhat of an exclusive for you because I haven't really told people about it, but I've co-founded a nonprofit called the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences. And we haven't really gone public with it yet, but the intent of this is to, really support a lot of our prior work in building initiatives to drive open standards creation, but also to educate, inspire, and acknowledge the success of people who have done the hard work over many years in the field. The XR Hall of Fame event at AWE is the kind of thing that, we really believe in. And so for me, a lot of what's going to be important is that we have the value of a data interchange format of like a CSV or a text file where we can still use that or XLS even to some extent, even though that's somewhat proprietary, but be able to take those files and use them for decades is super important. As we get into immersive media, I've been pushing on standards for volumetric media as an example, so that we can do the work of capturing and then know that a one-time only shot of that data is going to be preservable and reusable, not just 5 years from now, but 10, 20, 30 years from now. So these standards, WebXR is really great as an example, because now we've actually even got Apple overtly not behind a hidden flag for a developer settings panel, but it's overtly supporting WebXR and Safari on Vision OS. And so that's, the value of this is that we can start to bring some democratization of deployment. And as cool as any one device gets, I still, as a business person, need to be able to monetize across as many devices as possible because the market's still too small, even in aggregate.
100%. In terms of telco and the adoption of 5G technologies, you're probably one of the few people that can answer this. When are we going to get there where we are able to then forget about compute on the headset and worrying about battery sizes to where it's accessible, and when we actually can have true 5G so we can actually just stream content onto headsets?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting compound question. So first, let's look at the connectivity side of it. So you need connectivity because no matter what kind of advancements we have in chipsets, we need to access data that's in the moment or models or data sets that are too big to physically fit on any device. And so in those contexts, we need reliable connectivity. The value of Wi-Fi is great indoors, but if I want to do a use case that involves indoor-outdoor or outdoor-only use cases, then I have very limited ability to utilize Wi-Fi unless I tether to my mobile phone. And so for those use cases, having 5G or LTE connectivity through some manner really helps the device be able to reach into these new pieces of data that exist and do things on the fly. But there's more to it than that, as you implied. So as I mentioned earlier, the sort of sentiment of software moving down to the microcode is really so that we can try to be more battery efficient. Battery efficiency is one of the biggest value propositions of bringing all of these functions onto the chipsets. And designing chipsets for low energy consumption has been a big focus for the chipset manufacturers for quite some time. And ironically, even NVIDIA, which makes giant chips and bigger chips and all that, is creating a pain point of energy consumption for AI businesses because there's just not enough electricity available to serve the demand, right? So on the headset side, if we want to get to an all-day wearable device, basically an AR, whether it's optical or camera pass-through, and I frankly don't care. I think the argument is moot. Customers just care about the end experience. They don't care how the technology worked to get you there. I think that in order to get to the 50 gram or less weight, so the weight on the bridge of your nose is, fairly low, and it could be a little heavier than these kind of glasses, but it needs to be comfortable enough that I don't think about it, that I'm comfortable wearing it for 4, 6, 8, 12 hours, right? I don't think about these glasses. They're on my face. I take them off at night. When I go to bed, I put them on when I get in the morning. So if I want to have that with AR, then you have to offload some of the compute tasks from the headset to address battery and compute and heat. Heat is another important thing. So there's, physics are hard, batteries are hard, optics are hard. And so we keep plowing through incrementally. On the latest chipsets from Qualcomm, we're starting to see some movement here. Konaku showed at AWE the first wireless AR headset based on a Qualcomm chipset. So that's completely wirelessly connected. And I think that's a good starting point. XReal with the Beam Pro showing a headset that's connected to a device which also has the ability to connect directly through cellular as well. And We see this with other smaller AI devices where they're leaning into having not just Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but also cellular connectivity so that they can tap anywhere the internet and utilize the services. Whether they're connected through Wi-Fi or through cellular, they're still basically going to do the same thing. Now we get to the issue of leveraging the other devices that we have. If I've got mobile phones in my pocket, why are we not tapping them for compute, not just connectivity? And so here what we're seeing with the mobile phone industry is a move to bring more and more of the models directly onto the device. We saw that with the Samsung Unpacked event just a few days ago in Paris with the Fold and the Flip 6, where they're showing the AI functionality that's truly staying on device. Apple's got the same storyline that they're pushing, and they always have. It's about data privacy and doing those things. So there's a lot of work being done now to bring, a balance between a 1 billion and a 7 billion, model onto the device so we can do everything there. And I think that'll continue, and then you'll see chipsets that put the models directly on it. Qualcomm has showed some of this sort of AI services stuff done at the chip level. And so I think we're in this very tight sort of cycle of iterative improvements to bring the AI models for different types of functionality, whether it's Gen AI stuff that we see, or whether it's other types of media generation or enablement and multimodal interaction, speech input, real-time translation, hand tracking, eye tracking, all of these things. And the balance will continuously shift between the compute on the headset and the chipset functionality, the adjacent devices. I always call it your personal area network of devices. So these are the devices that are the wearables or pocketables that are on your body. And leveraging them as a mesh of compute function is something that we'll see evolution on. So it's like a user edge compute platform, right? I am the edge, and all of the compute is part of that. And then I think there'll be a little bit more value proposition about low latency edge computing. So you'll start to see more infrastructure build out. We see that happening in the US, but also internationally, because latency matters here. And for a lot of use cases, the normal backhaul latency of going to a regional data center is too slow. Even in a high performant area of the country, it's not performant enough. And so we need to basically do this sort of balancing act. How is this going to evolve? Is that a lot of stuff is going to end up running on a mobile phone, and these glasses are going to tether to the mobile phone through wireless connection. And then eventually at some point, the bigger devices will tap cellular direct, and they'll do it in two ways. They'll probably do it through a compute puck, where you'll get a SIM card and you'll shove it in the compute puck, and then that will connect on behalf of the device, maybe even provide some local compute and battery enhancements to the device. And you can sort of think of like the battery puck on the Apple Vision Pro as a form factor, but for other devices, Android-based ones, where they'll actually put compute there. And that's been a story for quite a while. Many vendors have built compute pucks for their AR headsets. But I think the other big one is going to be the advancements in 5G. So as we really get 5G deployed everywhere, and we have standalone 5G where we're not sharing the LTE connection, then we can start tapping network slicing and also new radio standards like 5G RedCap or NR, which allows for a device which needs to be very, very battery efficient to stay connected to the 5G radio network and much lower cost than, say, a mobile phone, which has a big giant battery in it. So for these small battery devices that want to be cellularly connected, they're going to need to move from SIM and eSIM to onboard radio. And we've seen, the chipsets have this, but the developers that build around those chipsets aren't tapping that functionality. I mean, Qualcomm chipsets have had LTE and 5G radio connection on board the SoC for quite a while, but you don't see people tapping that quite yet because of the other costs associated with, doing that and the justification for those costs. I know it's a lot. Big answer. Sorry.
No, that was great. I think, in terms of having the processing through the edge, that's going to play a big role to where 5G can roll out to actually really have great content streamed to the headset. But the idea of a puck, we saw that with the Apple Vision Pro. It's almost the perfect size as your latest iPhones. We're getting there. But at the same time, it makes me think like, well, it's still a long time, because it's really based on the operating system, and the operating system to make it work as a way to stream content to the headset, we're kind of far away.
Yes and no. So there's some technical standards that have been implemented underneath the hood, even on iOS, going back to iOS like 15. I was involved at Deutsche Telekom tangentially on a standard called L4S, which is, in a very simple way, a way to have an application and the radio tower talk to each other. And the radio tower can say, hey, I have congestion. Here's what kind of congestion's happening. And then the application can dynamically make different server requests based on the knowledge of the traffic and congestion on the network. And this bidirectional communication, instead of just doing best effort on an app, I'm going to try to stream a video and maybe you're going to get all the frames or maybe you're going to lose every third frame. I don't know. Now the application can say, you know what, the congestion on the network requires that I ask for the data stream of this video at a lower bandwidth. So now you'll get lower quality, but you'll get every frame. And that's always a preferred trade-off. L4S has been built into the iOS platform, and actually it's even on Apple Vision Pro. It's hidden inside developer network settings, but it's there. But it's early days. Developers don't see the value of it yet. The reality is that most application developers don't want to know anything about networking. They don't want to know. They just want, is it connected? Yes or no? On or off? Is 5G Boolean? Maybe, and that's about it. We're moving though towards an environment where telcos have an opportunity to provide value to the XR ecosystem by putting functionality on the network. So putting function in the compute of the network enables developers to start tapping things that they haven't been able to tap. And this could be, whether it's like what we see today with Google Cloud APIs, where you're doing like translation and other kinds of sort of API calls. But I also think it allows us to have a better performance and battery consumption experience. And so then there's an opportunity for somebody to build some middleware that smartly orchestrates all this stuff. So as I did a demonstration at AWE on this concept I coined 2 years ago called Gen XR, where we take real-time Gen AI services and we integrate them to do an on-the-fly creation of an XR experience. So instead of it being a CapEx-based construction where I do all the work up front and I design and build and then deliver, now it's very heavily weighted towards OpEx, because now I'm costing as it executes, it builds on the fly for the user, but it creates a completely different sort of value proposition for the consumer. And I think that this is where AI services can be orchestrated to be cost effective, to be standardized, and so that developers can tap them. And this is the question of, now, is somebody going to come in and do this, or is it going to be an acquisition roll-up situation where an Apple or a Google or a Meta is going to buy these companies and try to roll it up into the operating system? Right now, we are in an OS war on XR. So we have, Horizon OS, we have Vision OS, and Android XR, let's call it. So there is going to be competition here in this space. And so I think there's going to be a lot of roll up and aggregation of function. And eventually they'll lean into, the telcos are also looking at this and saying, hey, how can we put function on the network to provide value for much broader use cases in XR? But, can we tap and market that towards an XR developer? And compression is another area where I think there's a lot of effort being put into, how do I, in a very efficient way, compress stream the content to the glasses? There's a lot of companies are working on technology, display technology, transmission technology, to put these components into AR glasses to enable them to do really high quality streaming directly to the device. A lot of people originally thought that back a while, that Apple Vision Pro, or what they thought Apple was going to come out with, was going to be a streaming product. Lightweight AR glasses that stream the content from a phone or some other compute platform. I think we're going to get there. And I think you're going to see iteratively everybody working towards that, because we can't put the big thing on our head forever.
That's right. That's right.
That's not going to happen.
It's not going to work.
Those are going to be the museum things that we look at, like
That's right.
And we can go back to the devices that I worked on in the 90s, and they look. If you ever seen at AWU, they had the XR museum of all the devices, and you see these giant headsets that like
Yeah,
crazy stuff.
the Imagineers at Disney, that 60-pound headset that had to be suspended
Yep,
on the wires so it didn't give someone neck fractures. I thought that was really interesting. In
that's right.
terms of predictions for 2025,
Yep.
we discussed a lot of things that are happening in the developer ecosystem. We talked about some hardware. We talked about telco's role, about how to stream and their advancements to where AR glasses can be able to incorporate the streaming technologies. We're getting there. But what are some of the predictions that, Terry, you have for the next year that you think are going to be interesting to watch?
So about 2 years ago, I started explaining what multimodal input was to my colleagues and the executives that I work for. And, in the last 6 months, that's become like almost the buzzword of XR, multimodal, right? But we haven't realized the true power of it. And we've seen some demos. I remember the very first, Google Gemini demo, which was the top-down camera demo, where somebody was, sketching on Post-it notes, started to create this awareness of the idea of it, although that thing was clearly edited and not, not consumer-ready technology. The story of that is now starting to be communicated. I think Apple bringing the Apple Vision Pro starts to communicate the story of spatial computing, and the enablement of eye tracking and finger interaction starts that story, but it's still missing like voice input and being able to, I know in the research papers like that Apple and others have put out that they understand this and they've begun to build ways for people to naturally conversationally interact with spatial content. I did work like this in the 80s with, domain specific things like spreadsheets. So I understand how hard it is to do it generically, but this is where things are going to happen. So I think we're going to start bringing more multimodal interaction models together, and people will understand they can do what MIT showcased in 1981. They had a project called Put That There, that there was a demonstration, a real demonstration of multimodal interaction, where a guy sitting in a chair was pointing at a display, projected display, and saying, "Put that there," and moving his hand. And I always pitch that internally as make that magenta. So this idea that you could understand what that was because I'm pointing at it, you had context and you knew that what to do with it when I said make it magenta, is a way of trying to tell this story. I think the Ray-Ban Stories 2 has really done a lot to explain this. It's been unexpectedly successful because people started to realize when they released very recently the Meta AI services so that I can tap camera and voice interaction concurrently. That's where the real power is. Vision and voice interaction combined together changes the game for a really broad set of interactions that have nothing to do with use cases. It has to do with why am I wearing this device? Humane AI Pin, also good example of a device which taps vision, or the Rabbit R1, vision and voice interaction. So this is the storyline everybody's getting taught this year. Next year, you'll start to see that expand. I think event sensors, I was really disappointed. Unfortunately, one of the coolest things I saw at AWE was the Prophecy event sensor integration with the at the Ultraleap booth, where they were doing micro gestures with the event sensor that was mounted on the stem pointing down. And they said it was so fast that they could literally turn the device on and off by tracking whether your hand showed up inside the event sensor. So like just really cool stuff like that, making it very, very battery efficient, right? Kind of like a car stopping the engine at a stoplight and then turning it back on again when you start to press the accelerator. I think that those kinds of advancements are going to make a big difference on the hardware side to make things more battery efficient. We get super, super smart about how we leverage the network or any kind of connectivity as well. So advancements there with Wi-Fi 7 and new Bluetooth technology standards are going to help a lot. But ultimately, it's going to be the chipsets that really drive the faster advancement here. So everybody's going to be very dependent on what Apple does with Apple Silicon and what Qualcomm does to deliver a chipset that people can build really good AR headsets on top of, or MR headsets.
Right. And again, the OS wars I think are going to be deeper and a lot more violent
Yeah.
as it evolves. And I think in terms of what you had mentioned regarding being able to utilize 5G, what are the things that telcos should consider? Not speaking from Deutsche Telekom, but
Right.
should consider to help developers specifically?
Well, I think like one thing as a developer is, having these functions that can help me automate the balance act between compute and battery and just sort of, one of the value propositions of 5G was 100% reliability. That was literally one of the requirements for the 5G standard. So knowing, like how does your behavior change when there's no more signal meter on your phone? If it's on, you're connected and you just know that 100% of the time. Like, how does that change the way you decide to use the device? Right? Because today we have to look at that. Do I have signal? My expectations are set based on the bandwidth that the signal bar indicates I'm going to get, but I don't really know what that is. It's sort of a muscle memory, semi-intuitive kind of journey that I go through as a consumer going, I'm trying to download or upload an image, but it's going to take, not half a second. It's going to maybe take a minute. I don't know. I'm guessing maybe I need to put my phone outside the window of my car. Like all of that stuff needs to go away for us to have ubiquity. And so enabling that and then enabling through standalone, 5G standalone and 5G new radio, RedCap, I think that will then translate into developers leaning into applications that can really be dependent on the network for function 100% of the time. Because right now people, they a lot of apps just fall over and die if you're not connected to the internet. They don't even try to have a graceful, exit or degradation of experience. That's going to have to change because we're going to start moving the AI services onto the device and we're going to want those lower latency functions to be there. But then when we do want to build something that's super powerful, it needs to like just be able to figure out how to get the connection to work as best as possible for the user, and then tapping these like smart things like L4S so that as an app developer, I can make accommodation for the reality of the network connection on the fly. And I can maybe simplify that as a Unity framework developer, or maybe have a dial in my application that says, here's how aggressive to be with internet connectivity demands or battery or whatever, right? So there's a lot of tooling that's needed to make it simpler for people who are struggling just to figure out how to build affordance in an XR use case to expect them they're going to go understand networking and protocols and optimization and all that. It needs to be automatic.
Yeah, you said it best. Developers just care if it's on or off.
Yeah. I mean, and truthfully, we've educated a lot of developers to be increasingly lazy when it comes to software development. And I made the case at AWE that actually we're moving into what I call an era of disposable software that's so easy to create through multimodal interaction that I'm not actually writing code anymore. I'm actually describing software that's being auto-generated for me. And then it would take less time for me to redescribe a new product than it would be to try to edit the code that was auto-generated for me. So I just throw it away and I start over again. And I can provide, 1,000 use cases of that. So I think this ties together to why I think we're moving to an appless ecosystem experience. Companies like Brain and others who are working to build sort of layers that run on top of the traditional mobile app user experience to try to make middleware that sits between the voice interaction from the user and the function of these apps. This is going to have a lot of increased focus over the next 2 years. My company showcased this earlier this year at Mobile World Congress, where we did a demonstration of a concept phone that had an appless interface, and it was extremely successful. We had something like 2 billion media views of our content in the week of MWC. We've never had that much interest in anything we've announced in the history of the company. So I think that just shows that there's appetite for this idea of, instead of there's an app for that, I don't even have to think about it from an app point of view. I think about it from a user-centric point of view. What do I want? And if I can express it in some multimodal manner, it doesn't have to be voice because not everybody can speak, but through some methodology, I can express the need, then I can get the result. And I also think accessibility is also a huge win here. I focused a lot on being inclusive in thinking in terms of user access to experiences. And so now we can do things automatically for developers, like automatically adjust for neurodiversities, whether somebody can see or have low vision issues, or they have auditory challenges or color blindness or any other, neurodiversities they might have, they're dyslexic. We can enable developers to not have to solve for that and do it better than just like a couple switches inside of the framework of the device, but really change the way content is presented on the fly to support, and multimodal interaction is supported to enable those users to get the best possible experience. So there's a lot of opportunity there still.
I love the concept of a disposable app ecosystem. I mean, the way we even think of search, I mean, I kind of lean towards ChatGPT to look or find information now because search is such a terrible experience today. And I
Yeah.
do see a future where you don't need an app. You can actually just envision or think something. Maybe it's through brain BCI and being able to get the experience that you want on demand. But then how do you
It's,
monetize it, Terry? How do you make
yeah.
money?
So you make money in different ways, right? So I think if I were to tell somebody who's thinking about going to college to study computer science what they should study, it would not be programming languages or compilers. It would be learn data structures and algorithms. And
Right.
algorithms become the key to a lot of the enablement for Gen AI services and capabilities. So I think the money is going to, if you really want to make a lot of money, it's in algorithms. That's to me where the most opportunity is going forward because that's patentable. That's something that you can license. That's something that you can scale value off of. Data sets are also valuable. If you think about, for example, Niantic's VPS Cloud, right? They have crowdsourced more street level data than Google when it comes to users of Pokemon Go and Ingress and other products. And so that data set becomes hugely valuable because other people can tap that for completely different types of use cases and they can scale revenue from that. So I
100%.
think those are examples of ways that users can, or sorry, developers can build value in the future.
Terry, I learned a great deal. Thank you so much for your time. Anything else you want to share that's going on in Terry's world?
No, I think, the one thing I I would like people to take away is that we still need to make experiences in XR fun. And I think one of the things I was trying to do with my Gen XR demo was to add some levity and add some unexpected or delightful surprises.
Surprise and delight.
Um, yeah, surprise and delight. So I think we need to think about doing that on a sort of personalized basis. We have this opportunity moving forward as software designers and consumers to get more fun out of these things and have, and not just because it's games, but just little things that I'll give you a simple example of something that has nothing to do with XR, but really struck a chord with me is the new flashlight UI on iOS 18, the latest beta. The UI for controlling the flashlight is fun. It's visually well animated, and it's just a fun experience to play with your flashlight. And so when you think about that, taking some very, very specific utility function and making it a fun thing that everybody's talking about on Twitter because it's fun. And so for me, I think we need to do more of that. I challenge the XR ecosystem to put more fun into everything from, the onboarding experience. For me, the Quest onboarding experience is a great example when they introduce Guardian Zones and they take you through this journey. That's fun. That
Yeah.
they totally understood that. I think we need to see more of that kind of thinking as we move forward.
I love that, Terry. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you cool down during this hot heat wave.
Well, now I'm sitting in the AC, so I'm fine.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Terry.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, my pleasure.